Hi. Bom dia. There we go. That is the extent of my Portuguese. No follow. It is it is so nice to be here. Thank you so much to Banco Safra for having me. And I don't say this lightly, but Brazil is one of my favorite places on earth to visit, and I am only sad that I cannot be here with my wife and three-week-old child, with whom they are together right now. But I send their love, and I'm certainly looking forward to coming back to seeing them enjoy the wonders of this country. So thank you for having me. I spent 16 years in AI, most recently, obviously, at OpenAI, and I basically talk about, I started working in AI before anyone cared about it, and I stuck around long enough for everyone to care about it. And what I realized in this process was that technology describes the history of progress, and that things move really slowly until they don't. And now I spend all of my time trying to figure out the answer to the question, what happens next? And I do so from sort of two vantages. I spend time with global Fortune 5,000 companies, exploring the ways in which technology is going to change their businesses. And I have a position at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and University of Virginia, where I'm studying the future of work. And today I'll talk to you wearing both of those hats, and I'll talk to you as business leaders, but I'll also talk to you as parents and friends and family and humans, because this is a particularly incredible moment for all of us as people. Now, before I tell you where we're going, I have to start by telling you where we are. And where we are is interesting, basically because it never was with respect to AI. Answering the question, where are we, as it concerned AI, was always a sort of a theoretical proposition. We started talking about this concept of thinking machines in 1900, and then we coined the phrase artificial intelligence in 1954, but it actually wasn't until much later that we started building machines that were actually capable of doing what it is we thought they would do. In 2017 in particular, 8 Google researchers, we now call them the Transformer 8, wrote a paper called Attention is All You Need, in which they argued that we had been building machine learning models all wrong. Instead of building them in straight lines, statistical machine learning models, we should build them in parallel, which was the concept of neural nets. And that catapulted us forward. That was the moment that truly caused this Cambrian event in the science. And we quickly went from building decent machine learning models to building great ones. First text to text, then text to image, then text to speech, and then text to video. And in 2024, OpenAI's GPT-4o, the state-of-the-art model at the time, won the Math Olympiad, the test to measure a human's potential to solve pure mathematical equations. And it was at that point that I realized visual representations of this technology were no longer sufficient. And in fact, showing anyone a visual representation of the technology was causing myopia. If I sat next to you on a plane and I showed you what technology could do, but you weren't actually capable of doing pure mathematics, you weren't even appreciating the full extent of this technology. And I stopped doing demos. And I basically, in this moment, started simply saying this. When people ask, what is this technology capable of? It explains where we have come, and it helps give you some idea of where we're going. Now, obviously, we've gotten exceptionally good at this. And this slide, to me, is breathtaking every time I see it. We went from building machines that were barely competent at measuring sentiment in a tweet to building machines that could conduct multi-step, multi-environment research in 5 years. Very recently, a Google researcher, this is pretty remarkable, a Google researcher wrote in a paper that announced a major breakthrough in reinforcement learning. In the credit section, at the very end of the paper, he wrote, above all else, we credit this breakthrough to divine benevolence. Even the researchers are at the point now where they're like, yeah, God is good. That's what's going on here. There is so much humility at this point to appreciate how much progress we've made. And the remarkable thing is, it's not even the most exciting thing that's happening in AI. Inference is what we call actually running the model. And that is really exciting for all sorts of reasons. It's particularly exciting for you as consumers and as business users because it means you get to do something with it. It means the technology will actually matter to you. It's not sufficient. You can run it on DeepSeek, by the way, for 55 cents. This happened with water, it happened with foodstuffs, it happened with electricity, it happened with the internet. And in those cases, it took thousands of years or hundreds of years. In AI's case, it's taken 5 years. 5 years for this technology to go from very expensive to extra cheap. And in fact, so cheap, the best party trick I have, and the only one that I'll demo anymore, is I can run GPT-4 equivalent model on my device, on my cell phone, disconnected from the internet, on the CPU. And I can run a GPT-5 equivalent model on my Mac Studio at home, powered by Kimi's K2. That's wild. So given that we are building these exceptionally brilliant machines, and given that they are getting very cheap to run, the inference cost is declining precipitously, then I can tell you where I think we're going. Now, first, I must say, I am not telling you where we're going because I need you to believe everything I'm about to say. This is not meant to be scriptural. This is meant to be directional. I would not bet everything on all of it. I would bet most of it on most of it. And I've also discovered that I am willing to defend my ideas much longer than most people are willing to attack them. And I've missed flights, as a matter of fact, just to defend my ideas. So I would suggest that at the very least, suspend some disbelief. Give me a chance to explore a world that you may have not considered before you make up your mind. Now, I will start with the biggest idea. In 2021, Boris Power, the head of research engineering, and I, the two business people inside of OpenAI, were traveling around the world showing CEOs in particular, GPT-3. And we would show up in a CEO's office and we would open up GPT-3 and we'd do a demo. And when the demo was over, we'd be like, what do you think? And they'd be like, well, is that it? And we were like, well, yeah, but how much do you want? And they're like, well, none, please get out. And what we realized after a while is that GPT-3, as exciting as it was to us because it was changing the science, didn't actually matter to the CEOs because it wasn't changing their business. It was very slow, it was very expensive, and it wasn't very good. And so what we realized we needed to do is actually start giving them some idea of where it might be going. So finally, I started doing a short demo, and then I would fold my laptop and I would say this. Now imagine it got a lot better, a lot faster, and a lot cheaper. And what we exactly said at the time was, imagine if we built GPT-4 or GPT-5. And what we wrote in June 2021 to help CEOs appreciate where we thought this technology was going, so much collective shared capacity to do cognition that we wouldn't actually be able to compete on the basis of it for much longer. And I now spend a bunch of time talking and thinking about the implications of unmetered intelligence. What does it mean and what happens? And for the next 20 minutes, I will tell you what I think unmetered intelligence offers us, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'll start with where I think it could go wrong. How do I think unmetered intelligence complicates and compromises our lives? The first thing that I talk about when I talk about the downside of unmetered intelligence is the theory of idiocracy. I don't know how this translates into Portuguese, but I have to imagine that it's pretty straightforward. The theory of idiocracy basically says that at some point an individual may discover that critical thinking is no longer of material importance to survival, and they will stop doing it. And when I talk about idiocracy, a lot of people meet with a collective groan of agreement. There is a sense that everyone around us is getting dumber. Here's the problem. There is underlying data that actually suggests some of this is true. It would appear that Gen Z, not to pick on Gen Z, I don't know if anyone's here, it would appear that Gen Z will be the first generation in many to not be materially smarter than the last. And in fact, it would also appear that Gen Z may in fact end up being dumber when all is said and told, on average, than millennials. Right now in the developed world, we are undoing about 20 years of academic progress on literacy and motor function. Gen Z is less likely to swim and to ride a bike. And that's not great. That's pretty bad. But, show of hands, how many people in this room are parents? Awesome. You can give me parental advice later. How many of you observe that your child is smarter than you were at that age? I won't ask for the inverse, by the way. The reason that more than half of you, and I would estimate probably 75% of you, raised your hand is because, it's not because you're proud. You are proud. It's actually because you're observing an incredible phenomenon, which basically suggests that right now, while we are observing a population choose to let their brain rot by sitting on a couch and scrolling all day, another percentage of the population is exploring the boundaries of their personal limits at an age younger than we have ever seen. And Gen Z appears to be the first generation in many to have an almost higher standard deviation occurrence of genius and savant qualities. We are breaking records across art, science, math, and sport at a younger and younger age. The markets are even responding. OpenAI and Palantir have done away with their requirement of a college degree at this point, and Alex Karp recently hired 40 high schoolers into Palantir. Some of it's political performance, but a lot of it, in his estimation, is hiring young people who have not been taught bad lessons. OpenAI, I know for certain, has 2 people in the research team who don't even have a high school diploma. That's amazing. What I argue we are observing is not idiocracy, it's actually a K-curve. And it's not a result of AI, it's actually a result of economic abundance. We have created enough on this earth that if you want to do nothing, you can. And if you want to do a lot, you can too. The cost to freedom, we may discover, is a population's willingness to do nothing with it. And that may actually just have to be a cost of progress. That in fact, what we have to start teaching in our schools is not math and science, but a sense of agency and personal responsibility. We need to teach children that in fact, the decisions they make matter and they can control their own destiny. The second thing I worry about is dehumanization. This one is much more sobering. Dehumanization is the theory that says at some point an individual will discover that they have more interest in a virtual or digital reality than a physical one. And I will not ask for show of hands because it is actually quite sobering and a little heartbreaking. But if I did, the number of you in this room that would acknowledge your child is less social than you were at that age would bother all of us. And the reason for this is that we introduced smartphones and social media to a population that did not know how to manage them. And in doing so, drove an incredible percentage of our young people into reclusion and isolation and eventually depression and anxiety at an epidemic level. And we should just talk about it. We should be open and honest about the fact that we made a huge mistake here. Now, we get to fix it, is the good news. And there are lots of ideas out there on how to fix it. Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation, an NYU professor, has basically crusaded for the last 5 years that we need to pass very, very strict policy around cell phone and social media usage among teens. He has advocated for no phone zones in schools and is now actually encouraging countries to ban social media under a certain age. Denmark, in fact, last week passed an age restriction on social media at 15 years old. And many states in the United States are passing no phone zones in schools. I like this. I'm excited about the idea of passing strict policy, but I also acknowledge that prohibition didn't really work. Laws only go so far, and they often create a bunch of unintended consequences in gray markets. What I argue, the most effective way to actually change behavior, the most effective way at building incentive structures, is not a tax, it's an alternative. And if we are right now observing a generation or an entire population take more interest in a digital or virtual reality than a physical one, my argument now is we should reinvest in the physical world. One of the crusades I am on is to beg people to consider that in a future of digital abundance, one of the most important currencies and maybe the most noble crusade anyone can go on is reinvesting in the physical spaces in which we live. Build communities in which children want to go outside that are safe and inviting so that they can explore and learn together. We should stop asking, why don't kids want to go outside? When we started building cities, you can't even walk to a grocery store or coffee shop. And we have long forsaken the physical world in exchange and at the altar of a digital god, and now we actually need to go back and realize the mistake. And we have an exciting opportunity. I spent last week, this is fun. Last week I was with the governor of Texas, exploring his power plant plans and his chip fabrication facilities. And at the end of this tour, I was like, that's really cool. Could you just promise me you're going to build protected bike lanes and sidewalks? Like, could you just guarantee all of your mayors that you're going to offer tax abatements for local retail with all of this surplus? Please build cities in which people are going to be excited to live. Do not forget that's the whole point. The third thing I worry about is bad acting. There are basically two kinds of bad acting. High resource bad acting, nation states and bond villains, and low resource bad acting, psychopaths and financial criminals. For most of human history, if someone wanted to harm you, they had to see you. And then we invented weapons, and they could harm you from a slightly greater distance, and then we invented much more powerful weapons, and they could harm you from a much greater distance, and so on. And then we invented the internet. And in inventing the internet, we did something that we have never properly reconciled. We actually invented the nameless, faceless bad actor, the boogeyman. The risk that at any given moment, someone that you have never seen and you will never see wants to harm you. And the scary thing about this moment is that I don't think we fully grokked it. I don't think we've ever processed this. It explains why the physical world can feel safer than it has ever been for many people, and yet we are deeply unsettled. And the way I explain it is actually quite simple. If we all went out to a park in Sao Paulo, and I was giving this lecture in a park and someone walked up and brandished a knife, we would leave. I mean, there's probably a hero among us. Maybe they would dispatch this person, but we would still leave. We'd go back, we'd come back here and we'd say, okay, it's safe, that's fine. And when that happens, what we are reminded of is that one person can make a common space feel very uncomfortable. And when we talk about the toxicity of the internet, when we talk about the risk online, we're not actually making an indictment of the human population. If 5% of the population is psychopathic and another roughly 5% are financially criminally inclined because they figured out how to make crime pay even if they know it's wrong, that means 9 to 10% of your neighbors are antisocial. If you lived in a neighborhood where 9% of your neighbors wanted to harm you, it wouldn't feel safe. And that actually explains why the internet feels weird. It feels weird because a certain percentage of the population is in fact antisocial. And the real problem with AI is it supercharges everyone, including those people. We have this issue, we know it's an issue, and the real problem now is solving what they have, which is a first mover advantage. And one of the crusades I'm also on is to convince policymakers at a state and federal level to start passing very punitive policy to punish low resource bad actors who attempt to tear the fabric of society using technology, because the costs are coming down. And recently we had a big win. The state of Florida passed a very interesting law. Florida passed a law that says if you get caught attempting to steal from a senior citizen in Florida using technology, which we broadly defined, you are extradited to Florida, where you will stand trial for up to 25 years for attempted financial crime. Good. Let's make it terrifying for people to use exceptionally inexpensive technology to do exceptionally scary things. Because if we don't, my fear is it will get much, much weirder before it gets better. And the big risk with the low resource bad actor is it can quickly degrade the trust in a society. The last thing I worry about is job displacement. This will be really fun. I ask every group this, so I'm just going to ask you this. It's another chance for a show of hands. Who here is worried that AI might take your job? Please show your hand as proudly as you can. That's a very confident bunch, but I appreciate that. You're very successful, smart people. I get it. Fine. Yeah, Brazilians are confident anyways. Not lacking in that department. Please show me your hands again, though. How many people in this room believe that AI might take someone's job in this room? The dynamic of actually is really, I don't know if it's only the people on the bottom can see. You guys can't see, but they all raised their hand. They were pointing at you guys. This is called the zombie apocalypse phenomenon. I've written about it. If I was a behavioral psychologist, this is all I would talk about. The zombie apocalypse phenomenon says that most people believe they would survive a zombie apocalypse and their idiot neighbor would certainly die. And you can see it everywhere. It exists all over the place. I also worry about job displacement. I worry about it a ton. I talk about it a ton. If I'm invited on CNBC or CNN or Sky, it's the question they always want to ask, which is, they point at me, they say, how many jobs are you going to take and whose jobs are you going to take? First of all, that's not what's going on here. I am obliged to answer the question. And if they give me the time, what I actually tell them is the answer. Because what most people talk about when they talk about the job displacement crisis is they talk about the economic consequences. What happens if AI takes all of our jobs? What we do for money? And if we don't have money, what we do for food? And if we don't have food, won't we starve? And that's just obviously not the problem here. I'll tell you a story that explains this and taught me this issue quite well. In October last year, October 1st to be precise, the dock workers went on strike in the United States. The longshoremen is what we call the union. Our third most powerful union, and by far our most powerful union per capita. On October 1st, Harold Taggart, the CEO, or the head of the dock workers, ordered all of the longshoremen to walk off the eastern seaboard. 45,000 men and women, 95% male union, walked off the job site and shut down our ports, stopping all imports and exports into the United States through their ports. And he went on CNN on the morning of October 2nd and very calmly pointed at the camera during a 60-minute interview and said to the American people, you have no idea how dangerous I am. I will cripple you. What did he want? What did Harold Taggart want? He didn't want more money, and he didn't want safer working conditions. Somehow, the two most popular and consistent tenets of all labor unions since we organized labor were not actually his talking points. What he wanted, what he demanded, was a guarantee from the ports that they would not automate the longshoremen's jobs. The picket signs that these men were carrying read, robots don't pay taxes and automation harms families. And I was fascinated. I sent him a very long, very thoughtful email, and he sent me something very different back. He signed it, fuck you. That's fine. I framed it. He did not want to meet with me. That's okay. I ended up meeting with 30 longshoremen. We went to the ports. We met with 30 of these guys. The results are in the book. These interviews changed my life, and a lot of the conversations are sort of too much to even make sense of. But I will tell you the responses to 4 questions that basically told us everything we thought we needed to know about this issue. First question we asked that told us everything we thought we needed to know. Do you believe you could be gainfully employed outside the union? 70% of the respondents said strongly agree, and only 5% of the respondents said strongly disagree. Second question, was anyone in your family in the union? 90% of the respondents had a family member in the union, past or present. Third question, do you want anyone in your family to join the union? 93% said yes. And one of the respondents said they were going to continue having children until they had a son so that their son could join the union. And the last question, what's the most important part of your job? Multiple choice question. The most popular answer, community. It's not an economic issue. One of the questions that I figured out we needed to ask pretty quickly was, who benefits if we automate the ports? Specifically, what I asked was, who benefits economically if we automate the ports? And reflexively, the longshoremen, each of them said the capitalists. They had been trained to talk about the capitalists as being the problem. The capitalists, they said. I said, okay, well, who are the capitalists? They said, well, it's the boat owners and the port owners. I said, well, okay, but surely that's not the only people who benefit economically. And if you pull on this thread long enough, you actually arrive at the answer. Who benefits economically if we automate the ports? Everyone. Everyone, including eventually the dock workers and their kids. And the reason I know this is because we are all descendants of people whose jobs were automated to our economic benefit, and we just do not pay them a second mind. In fact, we wander the earth, all of us, every single day, asking, When is this good or service going to be better, faster, or cheaper? Without realizing that what we're asking is, when is a human going to be extricated from the manufacturing of this good or service? And we don't do it because we're jerks. We do it because we're conditioned to believe that the world should always get better, faster, and cheaper. And when it doesn't, we're very aggrieved. And when you stare at this problem, you quickly realize that everyone is wondering when everyone else's job is going to be automated except their own. The dock workers want the attorneys and the accountants to get automated just as badly as the attorneys and accountants want their packages to arrive faster and cheaper. And the incredible thing about this particular moment is that we are observing what has been and will continue to be a trend wherein humans solve economic problems and arrive at emotional ones. And my argument now is we are not facing a job displacement crisis. What we are actually facing is an identity displacement crisis. A world in which we have attached so much of our purpose and identity to our work, where the longshoremen view community as the most important part of their job, where there are the two most common last names in the United States are Miller and Smith because we used to name ourselves after our profession, where retirement is a terrifying proposition for many adults because they cannot imagine a life without it, without their work. My argument is that even if there is more and better food on the table as we start to automate more and more work, we may actually discover that we cannot relinquish the identity of our work, that the emotional grievance does not make sense, and we will not accept even in favor of economic abundance. And I actually arrived at this, I realized long before I did this discovery. Something profound happened, and I'll tell you that story in a second. But before I do, let me tell you how this could go really well. How might unmetered intelligence reduce suffering and increase joy? How might we actually start to really unlock the world that we are tracking towards? The first thing that I think happens is the expansion of human potential, and I talk about this a bunch. This is not actually a very hot take, by the way. What one person can do today is about 90% more than what one person could do in 1995, about 400% more than what one person could do in 1960, and about 1,000,000% more than what one person could do in 1800. We are very economically productive. We are ripping on a GDP basis by any measure. It's why when you look around you, you live in a world that your great-grandparents could not have fathomed or described. And that's awesome. But it's not even actually the best part of expanding human potential. When you ask yourself, how could we live a better life if we were smarter? The answer actually isn't make more money, it's make scientific breakthroughs. The real answer to unlocking a lot of our potential is actually discovering more of our known universe. And that right now is happening. The indicators here are not blinking, they are flashing green. We discovered our first antibiotic in 60 years very recently because of AI. We split HIV out of DNA very recently because of AI. A baby KJ, the first infant ever in the world, received a custom gene therapy, a single shot, that cured it of a previously immutable disease in May this year thanks to CRISPR and AI. One shot reversed a lethal genetic disease. That is amazing. I'm willing to debate the moral boundary here, but in the meantime, it's pretty incredible that we are actually saving lives with technology that we couldn't have even imagined 5 years ago. And it's not limited to bio and life sciences, molecular sciences, particle sciences, material sciences, it's all ripping. I live very close to the quantum facility in Goleta, California, where they just produced Willow chip. Quantum computing is exciting. When I tell people about quantum computing, I go, quantum computing is exciting, unmetered intelligence is exciting. The really cool thing on the horizon is unmetered energy. The prospect of fusion, I don't think people have fully wrapped their head around, and you will live to see it. You will live to see a world where we cannot consume all the energy we can create, and it doesn't actually have a material consequence on our carbon footprint. That's amazing. And I know this stuff is going to come because Roger Bannister and the Wright brothers have shown us the way. Roger Bannister was the first man to ever run a 4-minute mile. Prior to him, we assumed it was a physical impossibility. Within 5 years, 45 other men had done it. The Wright brothers flew a plane when everyone assumed it was impossible. And the most important thing they did was not actually invent aerospace. It was prove that you could do it. Because within 70 years of these two psychos flying a plane 50 feet above the ground, 100 yards, we had space travel. Have a sense of humility when you consider how far we've come and how far we might go. The third thing that happens is deflation. I think there's a massive deflationary event. This is my second hottest take, by the way. When I talk about a massive deflationary event where the cost of goods and services plummet, people get very upset. And very recently online, someone was like, well, people get very upset online, but someone asked me if I'd ever been in a grocery store. And of course I haven't, but I know what they look like. I have been in plenty of grocery stores. I stare at the CPI data all the time. I know that a carton of eggs is more expensive today than it was 3 years ago. And also what I have to tell all these people, what I have to remind everyone is that a carton of eggs has never been less expensive in human history. We have abundance beyond our parents' and grandparents' wildest imagination. We live with so much stuff that none of them could have conceived of. And the incredible thing about this moment is that it's not actually deflationary income that anyone's worried about. There's another issue going on. When you really drill into the matter, why are people so upset about the theory of deflation? It's not that everything feels cheap. It's that three things feel very expensive: housing, healthcare, and education. When you ask young people, why don't you believe in a future that's deflationary? They point to the three things that are cripplingly expensive and the three things that they desperately want. And what I've realized in this whole journey, and the saddest thing that I have to remind them of, is the fact that these things are not expensive because we don't have a technological solution. They're expensive because we policied them that way. The reality is people have woken up to the fact that you can now drive across LA in an autonomous vehicle for $5, but a trip to the emergency room in an ambulance over 5 blocks might actually bankrupt you. That is fucked up, and everyone gets it. At this point, there is no more to figure out. We realize something. For about 500 years, every generation's greatest privilege and honor was to pass their luxuries to the next generation as commodities. And our ruling class, the global ruling class, pulled the ladder up. Something happened, a promise was broken, and people decided the world was fine just as it was. We didn't have to keep applying technology to these problems. And this TV screen went from $5,000 to $100, and somehow education got 20 times more expensive in the process. And now we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to do to education what technology has done to all the electronic components around us, massively drive the cost down. And the cool thing is it's going to work. It's going to work in every deregulated market where we let it. And then it's going to shine a very, very bright spotlight on the things that are expensive unintentionally or intentionally. And my pressure now on policymakers is to start getting very serious about letting technology drive down the cost of the things that are crippling people before there is a bigger issue. Because people are not going to tolerate it for much longer, and we have a solution finally. And the last thing I worry about, or the last thing I'm excited about, is that I think we're going to get a lot more time. And this, by the way, is my hottest take. My single hottest take is I think we're going to get a lot more time. And it's not that I think we're going to get a lot more time lengthwise. I do think we're going to live a lot longer. And when people ask, these days, I propose that you might get to decide when you die. That's a crazy idea. And people are like, whoa, that's crazy. You're a crazy guy. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But then I say to them, and I think you're going to work less. I think you're going to get more time back in the day. And that's where people literally point at me and go, no, you're an idiot. You're wrong. There's no way. There's no way that will happen. People hate this idea. And I have figured out why, I think. Older people hate this idea because of identity displacement. They hate the idea of themselves retiring, and so the idea that their child would work less is actually quite upsetting to them. They tell me, how will we find happiness without work? And the younger generations hate this idea because of what they call corporate greed. The ruling party will never let them have abundance, so why would they ever get more time back in the day? Both these ideas are reasonable, but the actual most pernicious issue is even sadder than this. When people tell me they think we are never going to be able to work less, They remind me that the internet promised to make us more productive, and in the end, we just work more. And my single response to them is, could I please see your screen time? My only response to people anymore is to please see their screen time. And what I have discovered in the process has changed my life and my view of this, because it goes something like this. I say to someone, could I please see your screen time? And they go, why does that matter? It's very defensive at first. And eventually, maybe they soften their edges. Actually, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they go, no, that's not important. Very recently, someone called me a pervert. I said, okay, I don't want to see your screen time. But then when people capitulate, and 80% do, it goes like this. And they look to see what we're both about to discover. And what I realized in all of this is that most of us live with an exceptional shame attached to an addiction to a device that we aren't even willing to talk about anymore. We have shrouded ourselves in a display that is actually spiritually degrading us. We project it. When we talk about device addiction, we go at the kids. Oh, the kids. They're so addicted to the device. And I go, yeah, except that the average Candy Crush user is a 59-year-old woman. We all are terribly addicted to a device, and we have excused it by explaining hustle culture and attention culture and all the things in between. And some of you, I have observed, have barely looked up at me this entire time. And it's not because you're a jerk. I'm not even accusing you of that. It's because this machine has captured your soul. I think we should actually start talking about it that way. The whole point of technology was to make our lives better, and in the end, it just trapped us. One of the crusades, the great crusade I'm on, is to convince people that this moment is important, if for no other reason than because someday in the future, we are actually going to get a chance to ask ourselves and our kids, what do you want to do today? I am sure of it. We will have solved an economic problem to an extent that we actually have to face something more profound. And I hope that when that day comes, we know that the answer is not scroll. I really hope that when that day comes, we know definitively that the answer is, in fact, to go outside with friends and family and be in community. Because if we don't, yeah, the world will look worse. And the last thing I'll do is I'll tell you how I think you can prepare, and then we'll go to Q&A. First, everyone right now is talking about adaptability. It's the thing on everyone's mind. It's like literally the only thing that half-rate strategy consultants will talk about, hire for adaptability. And what I realized in the process is if you are infinitely adaptable, you're a candle in the wind. So now what I say is this. You must now anchor to your mission, vision, and values. It has never been more important to actually declare what it is you want to accomplish, and you should be unwavering in that. You should also be exceptionally adaptable to your ways and means, how you do it. The technology is going to give you incredible new ways to actually change what you do. You have an opportunity now to explore how you want to accomplish something in incredibly new ways. Second, learn how to learn. Young people ask me all the time, it's the most popular question I get asked by high schoolers, what should I study in college? And I have a very boring answer as far as they're concerned. First of all, what they're asking, just so you know, when somebody asks what should I study in college, what they're asking is how do I make a lot of money? That's what young people are deeply concerned about now. How do I make enough money to buy a house? That's really what their question is. They just don't know it. And my answer sucks as far as they're concerned, which is it doesn't matter. What I tell young people is you should remember that the point of college is to make mistakes you were not comfortable making in front of your parents. And also, you should recognize that it's actually a chance to become an adult. But if you must go to college, you should study something you love. Study something that you're excited about exploring, not because those ideas are going to get you a better job or make you more money, but because you are excited to explore those ideas on the basis that learning and mastery is inspiring. Such that when you graduate college, even if what you have studied has commoditized, you are capable of acquiring new skills. That's actually what your employer is going to care about. The market will value people who can acquire new skills versus those who are exceptionally skillful. And the last thing, design around things that AI cannot do. Every CEO calls me all the time. What is AI going to, what's OpenAI going to build next? How are we going to, what is our moat? How do we figure this out? And I started doing what I called a negative space project because what I realized is in the pursuit of trying to figure out what AI was going to do next, what people weren't actually exploring are all the ways that unmetered intelligence wasn't going to change their job. And so I've run what I called a negative space project about 50 times. 50 different companies, I have explored the ways in which unmetered intelligence will not change their business. And having done this experiment a bunch, I have a very high conviction answer. It is quite simple, which is that we should optimize for humanistic qualities. Now, I have explored this all sorts of ways. I spent time with real estate agents who I realized were no longer getting hired because they got anyone a better price on the house. They were getting hired now because people like spending Saturday and Sunday with them. I spent time with wealth managers who no longer get hired because they make people more money. They get hired because people trust them. I spent time with bartenders. Everyone's favorite bartender, it turns out, sucks at bartending. People like their bartender because they like them. They're nice. It's a service. Much of the work we do is actually being reduced to this. And then I had an experience that totally changed my life that I will tell you about. My father is an oncologist. He is a cancer doctor who has been practicing, in particular, breast cancer for 38 years. In that time, in those 38 years, the survival rate for breast cancer went from 35% to 90%, which is in and of itself a testament to the things that we can do, the hard problems we can solve in the pursuit of building a better world. He recently won a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Breast Cancer Association of America. And I will tell you, growing up, I saw my dad as a brilliant man and a scientist, someone who was saving lives because of how smart he was. And I went to this awards ceremony as I had done so many other events, so excited to hear people talk about the brilliance of my father, because that was part of my identity. And I went to this awards ceremony flanked by my wife and mother and sister and listened to a patient of his give him his award. She got on stage and she spoke for 5 minutes. For the first 30 seconds, she talked about her patient outcome. She had survived breast cancer very recently and was now living a fulfilling life. And for the next 4.5 minutes, she talked about how my dad made her feel. She described getting a cancer diagnosis, a breast cancer diagnosis, and going to interview 3 different oncologists and getting the same 3 prognoses and the same 3 treatment recommendations. And then she said 2 things that I will never forget. The first, she said she realized after the 3rd identical prognosis and treatment recommendation that the machine was obviously smarter than the doctor. She said the science had progressed far enough that everyone knew what the next best action was because an algorithm knew it. And then she said that the bedside manner was no longer a feature, it was the product. And that changed my life. Because in that moment, I realized that my father was not important to his patients anymore because he was brilliant. He was important because he was courageous and compassionate. The same qualities that I loved in him as a son, so too did his patients. And I also realized that if medical oncology, which we had long exalted as one of the most cognitively complex practices in medicine, could cognitively commoditize, what role wouldn't eventually? My father is 77 years old. He is well past his intellectual sell-by date, if we are being totally honest. And he has probably never been a better oncologist. He is actually receiving another award tonight named after him, the Fred Kass Caring with Compassion Award, given by the county, in which he is actually going to attribute his ability to continue practicing medicine to science's ability to let him focus on patient care. That is awesome. It suggests that something fundamental is happening right now, which is that if our doctors are allowed to focus more on patient care because the science is solving much more of the complex issues, consider curiosity, consider empathy, consider courage, consider wisdom. My argument actually is that AI, despite all the doom and gloom, is not actually going to incline us to be more human. It may require us. I'm just not sure how anyone makes a big dent in the world by being brilliant only for much longer. If you don't agree with me, you're wrong, unfortunately. And while I can intellectually convince you of the fact that today is a great day, I cannot necessarily emotionally convince you of this. And the reason that I can't emotionally convince people of this is because we are grossly overexposed to negative information and grossly underexposed to positive information. We feed ourselves so much bad news, and then we wonder why everyone is so worried about the future. You have a bunch of biases in your brain that you inherited from your ancestors. We all do. 4 of them plague us: the attention bias, the selection bias, the negativity bias, and rosy retrospection, which tells us the past was way better than it actually was. And the incredible thing about this moment is that I argue we now have a moral obligation to start talking about and telling stories about a future that is better, such that our children can be inspired enough to help us build it. It's not that the world doesn't have problems, it's that the solutions to these problems have actually never been more present. We just aren't willing to look at them. And what I would argue is that optimism should not be considered naive. And if I can be a source of it for you today, that's great. And my challenge to everyone in this room is be a source of it for someone else tomorrow. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Zack, that was fascinating. Great speech, and I'm sure we all enjoyed it. We could probably spend the rest of the day listening to you and thinking about the impact of AI. And I would like to, explore, I think, related to this final point, which is we saw in 13 that movie Her, where Joaquin Phoenix had the relationship, the Lonely Rider had the relationship with the AI, and Blade Runner, Ryan Gosling had the relationship with another AI. What impact? And we're hearing more and more of people using ChatGPT as their best friend, as their confidant. And I'd like to know your view on how you think AI will impact human relationships, or let's.
Well, listen. So I don't. I used to watch all the dystopian films because I wanted to be up to date, and then I just decided I didn't want to watch them anymore because it's the only thing anyone makes. And by the way, if you want a good recommendation of a dystopian film, if for those of you who enjoy them, the film Companion handles the alignment problem exceptionally well. So just make a note of that. Her, to me, is the best dystopian film maybe ever made. It is an exceptionally haunting film that leaves you unsettled precisely because it is so believable. It is one part science fiction and one part very much just a drama about a man who falls in love with a robot.
Yep.
And in that sense, I am terrified. But I also have looked at the data enough to observe a pretty consistent trend. I think it is exceptionally likely that many people fall in love with artificial intelligence of some kind. And love, broadly defined as sort of infatuation. That many people become infatuated with a virtual experience in the same way that they were once infatuated with Candy Crush or a video game, except that now it can talk back. What I am also very sure of is that it will not actually lead to happiness. And one of the things that gives me the most comfort about the future is that the teens are not happy. And I know this is very upsetting to parents, but I actually think when we stare at this problem, we should be very relieved to see that device addiction is not actually satisfying anyone, right? Like the dopamine hits, but after a while, people are like, this is not what I want. And you're seeing the regression to the mean. You're seeing Gen Alpha already want to be on the device less and actually go outside more. And so what I think happens is the pendulum is going to swing, I think, further still to a very scary place where more and more people, especially young men, who frankly have probably been forsaken by society, given the war on men that is occurring in the West right now, we should acknowledge that it is going to be pretty hard for a lot of men who never had a chance with a woman to not fall in love with a machine that actually gives them attention. But I don't think it actually results in anything good. And as upsetting as that is, I am reminded constantly that humans are very good at discovering vices, getting very addicted to them, and then kicking the habit. And what I'm reminded all the time is if you had studied the United States, and probably Brazil for that matter, but certainly the US, in 1955, you would have safely assumed that everyone was going to die of lung cancer and liver failure. And many did. And I mean, I'm fairly certain that my grandmother smoked through all of her pregnancies. We don't talk about it, it's very taboo, but she did, I bet. And it's a reminder that we've long done things that aren't actually healthy only to figure out that we need to do other things. And what I think we should acknowledge right now is that this is in the line of alcohol addiction, sugar addiction, amphetamine addiction. This one comes next. And we are very good at solving a problem and identifying a new one. And this to me is actually just going to be the biggest struggle for probably a long time, which is the battle, the spiritual battle for the soul of sort of every young person on earth. Can we give them a physical world to love? It's not to me about a job. It's about a purpose and a community, well beyond sort of the screen itself.
Well, you depicted very well what we're going through, the addiction and the amount of time we're spending on screens and so on and so forth. Is there a role for regulators? Is there a role for governments to try to kind of help either through regulation or through propaganda that raises the awareness of the evil of such addictions?
Yes. I actually fully support policies that protect children. Like I think a lot of policies are overbearing, and I generally am in favor of deregulated markets to allow technology to deflate the cost of goods and services. And I really wish right now that the only thing that policymakers spent much time on with respect to AI was alignment, explainability, and bad acting. I could go on and on about why those three things matter and not much else does. But I also very much appreciate and support the efforts that are being made by schools and states to ban phones in no phone zones and to restrict the use of social media. I just keep reminding people that prohibition has unintended consequences and rarely works as desired. It is very hard to tell a population you cannot do something, and it is much more important to show them something else that they can do, right? I mean, we taxed cigarettes to such a ridiculous degree. We were like, certainly no one is going to keep paying $30 for a pack of cigarettes. And they did. And then eventually we were like, wow, this is pretty punitive. We're literally just extra taxing cigarette smokers now. And so instead what we said is, okay, what about a smokeless tobacco? And like you can make the argument, but it is very exciting to finally explore a world where we can start to wean people off of addictions in other interesting ways. And I really think that policymakers should spend as much time talking about policy as they do about building better cities. Safe cities with walkability scores and access to good grocery stores are just obviously the solution to this device addiction problem, in my opinion. But by the way, we see this in the United States. The cities that have no walkability, you can ban phones all you want. What's a kid going to do in the winter when they literally have to drive anywhere? What do you think they're going to do? I mean, it's not that complicated.
Yeah. The other question is education. I mean, the educational system hasn't changed in a long time.
Yeah.
And with this whole revolution, how do you see, how do you think kids should be educated going forward, given everything that's happening? I think you mentioned some of the abilities and all of that, but how do you envisage a new educational system?
Well, okay. These are where my takes get kind of hot, as if they weren't already hot. But so my wife is a first grade Waldorf teacher, and I have become obsessed with the readings of and the writings of Rudolf Steiner, who founded Waldorf. And my understanding is there are actually quite a number of Waldorf schools and Montessori schools in Brazil. So alternative education is something you're very familiar with. I'm at a place now. I go to Waldorf, I watch Adley and her kids, and as far as I can tell, they go outside and eat bark. I'm like, what happens here exactly? And then I realized, like, it's the most important thing is what's happening. Like, Steiner's obsession with the soul and spirit of the child is so noble and so important. And 150 years ago, when he talked about the corruption of the child as a result of the industrialization of education, he was too early. He was right, but we actually had to do this in order to advance. We had to do this in order to build the factory workers of the future. But today, I argue, we actually can and should reinvest in the whole soul and spirit of the child, such that we raise people who love the earth. And I cannot get out of my head the idea that technology is going to make so abundant the ability for young people to catch up on any measure of sort of intellectual progress. But it will be very hard to tell a bunch of 15-year-olds that nature matters if they didn't grow up believing it. It will be very hard to tell a bunch of 20-year-olds that community matters if they didn't grow up believing it. And I'm not so extreme that I think that we should do away with all traditional education, but I have come to believe that there's a combination of 2-hour learning, exceptionally focused and precise AI-powered scholastic education, and then the rest of the day in social education. And I think the bifurcation of scholastic and social learning is going to be the major update to our education system over the next 10 years, when people realize that the classroom basically does neither. The modern classroom is not making your child a whole lot better at math, and they're not making them a whole lot better at making friends. And we should start bifurcating these experiences and putting them in very, very disciplined environments where they can learn all the sciences and all the STEMs that they need to know, and then putting them in environments on the playground and in nature where they can study game theory and physical education and teamwork. And I think that some combination of Waldorf and Alpha School, which is an AI-powered school in the US, could end up becoming a very popular system.
Any new school that's using that you that we could look at? Or
Well, yeah,
as an example or as a vision?
There are many. The one that's making heads right now in the United States is Alpha School. Mackenzie Price basically pointed at this issue 7 years ago with Joe Lamont, and they built a school in Austin, Texas, where students spend 2 hours a day in scholastic learning and the rest of the time outside. Now, I don't think they do enough. I think that Alpha School is still designed as an achievement center. I will also say that other teachers are having a ton of success with just different standards. So Success Academy in New York, which is by far the United States' shining example of public education, run by a woman named Eva Moskowitz. If you have not heard of this woman, she is a hero among heroes. She started a school after running for city council or for the teachers union leadership in New York, and she lost. She ran on reform, and they chased her out of town. And she went and started a charter school predicated on achievement as a function of measurement. And she's now just blossomed this program. I don't think what she's doing is obviously the future, but she's proving that you can build better systems outside the traditional ones. And my expectation is we will see this massive spike in homeschool and micro schools, and then a huge spike in private and charter that start to combine shorter scholastic days and sort of longer social ones.
Do you have a view?
So my take here is, when people talk about the bubble, what they're describing is sort of this like bet on I think specifically they're talking about, OpenAI and a few others. And I actually don't, some of this is like kind of flippant, but I don't really care. Like, I don't think that OpenAI has to win in order for AI to be successful at all. And in fact, at this point, I'm sure it doesn't. I think that OpenAI and sort of, American economy is probably inextricably linked to a certain extent. And the obvious example and answer is bio and life sciences. And I will tell you, the single best personal bet I ever made, I watched GPT-3 land and I went and hammered bio and life sciences stocks. I was like, and I particularly was interested in mid-cap stocks, because I was like, these are the companies that can actually do something with this. Another industry that I think is very exciting, in part because it's been undervalued forever, is ed tech. I think a lot of people are just not appreciating, and I don't mean ed tech in like the technology bet. I mean like starting a new school, like starting a new college. There's just a big opportunity here. And then the last, and I say this not just present company included, I think financial services. And the way that I think financial services wins is by expanding access for its goods and services to more people.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. It was fantastic. Thank you for your time, and I'll ask for a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Zack. Amazing speech. Agradecemos a Zack Kass, José Olímpio Pereira, por essa visão inspiradora sobre o papel transformador da inteligência artificial no futuro da humanidade. Pessoal, nossa pausa agora é para o almoço. A gente se encontra aqui daqui 1 hora. Eu peço a gentileza de vocês apenas deixarem os fones aqui na saída. Obrigado.